Vietnam's economy has grown dramatically over the last 2 decades.
Exports, of course, is the name of the game. About 75% of all exports in Vietnam is from FDI-backed institutes or corporations.
Vietnam's government says the country's economy grew a little over 7% last year.
From a war-torn, isolated nation to Asia's fastest-growing economy, Vietnam has become one of the most impressive case studies for developmental economics today. Expected to surpass Japan by 2030 and claim the title of the largest Southeast Asian economy, Vietnam has been very successful. Recognized for its French colonial history in the Indochina War, and marginalized for its communist inclinations, Vietnam today exemplifies the ascent of the global South in the evolving multipolar global order. Vietnam's economic rise has been the product of a youthful labor force, a thriving tourism sector, Vietnam's significant place in global supply chains, and its strategic use of regionalism through ASEAN. But to understand how Vietnam has emerged as a significant economic power in Southeast Asia, it is essential to explore the political and economic history of the country. From devastation to a frail economy, Vietnam's journey to becoming one of Asia's fastest-growing economies began in the ruins of war. Following the departure of French colonists in 1954, the North and South followed different economic paths. Under communism, the North prioritized heavy industry and strictly prohibited private businesses. The South, on the other hand, took a more transparent, capitalist stance and heavily relied on external aid, especially from the U.S. But during the Vietnam War, both sides suffered heavy losses. Nearly every city, town, bridge, port, and railroad in the North was destroyed by American airstrikes. As factories closed, farmland was destroyed, and livestock was killed. The economy collapsed. The South experienced significant damage due to attacks from the Viet Cong, the leftist rebel group resisting against the U.S. invasion. Its economy became more and more dependent on aid, and it struggled with internal displacement and poor infrastructure. After the war ended in 1975, America withdrew and the country was reunited. Vietnam faced a devastated economy and innumerable people killed or displaced. There was a significant shortage of trained workers as a result of the majority of the educated elite and skilled professionals leaving the nation. Vietnam was now heavily isolated and reliant almost entirely on aid from China and the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, Vietnam persevered in spite of this challenging past, and the Vietnam Communist Party promptly began developing a program for economic recovery. Vietnam's future position was largely determined by what transpired next. The struggles of reunification and the road to reform. Vietnam was formally reunited under the communist governance of the North in 1976, following the conclusion of the war in 1975. After seizing complete control of the economy, the Vietnamese Communist Party, VCP, started reshaping it under socialist principles. In order to direct every aspect of the nation's development, the government formulated national plans. These included 5-year plans with specific strategies aimed at creating a unified, resilient, socialist economy. Party leaders at the time thought they could change Vietnam in stages, first through recovery, then through socialist industrialization, and finally by 2010, when the system would be perfected. But things didn't work out as expected. The economy had significant challenges. Vietnam was among the world's poorest nations following reunification. Many skilled workers and business people were forced out of the economy, particularly in the South, when the government outlawed private companies and banned property ownership. Trade, industry, and agriculture all faced serious difficulties. The nation had to deal with severe shortages, rising expenses, and widespread corruption. People lost faith in the system as a result of numerous local officials abusing their positions of authority. The majority of people in Vietnam were only making $200 to $300 annually, and the country's GDP was only $18.1 billion by 1984. Poor weather, poor leadership, and the costly military occupation of Cambodia made matters worse and caused many Western nations to cease aiding Vietnam. However, the nation learned a valuable lesson from these mistakes. Leaders recognized the pressing need for reforms, early reforms, and the turning point in Vietnam's economy. Vietnam's leaders initiated ambitious national plans to expand the country's economy in the years following reunification. In order to rebuild the country and quickly transitioned it to a socialist economy, the Second Five-Year Plan, 1976 to 1980, called for fast growth in both industry and agriculture. However, the plan was too optimistic. Vietnam didn't have enough money, resources, or technology to accomplish its goals. The economy remained stagnant in spite of aid from China, the Soviet Union, and a few Western countries. A real overhaul began with the Third Five-Year Plan, 1981 to 1985. Leaders allowed some small private businesses to reopen, especially in the South, where the people had resisted total communist control. The introduction of a new contract system gave farmers more autonomy. Rather than working exclusively for the state, families could manage land, meet production goals, and keep excess crops. This encouraged people to work harder and grow more crops. This household economy grew to be a substantial source of food and income in rural areas by 1983. Food production benefited even though industry continued to receive more funding. The government acknowledged the importance of local markets and businesses to the recovery process. It gradually started to give farmers and factories more freedom and control over decisions. These modest changes prepared the way for later, more substantial economic reforms in Vietnam, which would eventually drive the country's rapid and sustainable development. Đổi Mới and the rise of Vietnam's fast-growing economy. Targeted investments, international integration, and smart reforms have made Vietnam's economy one of Asia's most rapidly growing economies. The pivotal moment occurred in 1986 when the government implemented the Đổi Mới policy designed to liberalize the economy. This reform allowed private businesses and encouraged foreign direct investment (FDI), marking a shift from a highly regulated system to a market-driven approach. Vietnam welcomed international partners, prioritized exports, and lifted trade restrictions. This improved public confidence and made trade and investment easier. During the late 1990s, the impacts of Đổi Mới became apparent. The economy was expanding at a rate exceeding 7% annually. Over 30,000 private companies were established, and poverty rates declined significantly. In rural regions, the percentage of impoverished households decreased from 66% in 1993 to 36% in 2002. While urban areas, especially Ho Chi Minh City, saw the most progress, many rural communities also benefited from this reform. Vietnam and the United States signed a bilateral trade agreement in 2000. This made it possible for Vietnamese products to reach the American market and draw in more foreign capital. Vietnam improved its international trade ties by joining the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2007. How Vietnam became Asia's fastest-growing economy. Throughout the years, due to rising global tariffs, Vietnam has attracted investment from countries like the US, Japan, and the EU, especially from sectors searching for alternatives to China. Vietnam is a great place for investors because of its political stability, skilled labor force, and advantageous location in the Indo-Pacific. It now plays a significant part in the production of smartphones, electronics, textiles, and footwear by taking advantage of its competitive edge in the availability of low-cost skilled labor. Vietnam took advantage of its strategic regional importance and joined a number of free trade agreements, including the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement and the ASEAN Framework, which gave it an economic advantage in the market and allowed it to increase its financial resources. The country's standing in international trade was also improved by investments in infrastructure including ports, highways, and digital networks. In addition to industry, tourism has developed into a powerful economic contributor. Vietnam's dynamic culture, affordable prices, and beautiful landscapes attracted over 40 million foreign visitors in the first few months of 2024. Currently, tourism accounts for 7% of the nation's GDP and supports about 6 million jobs. At the moment, Vietnam's economy is diverse and strong. It is currently the second largest exporter of coffee worldwide and is growing in industries like technology and renewable energy. The demand for retail, services, and real estate is rising due to a growing middle class, which supports the domestic market. According to analysts, Vietnam's GDP will grow by 6.1% in 2024 and 6.6% in 2025, demonstrating its steady ascent to prominence in Asia. Vietnam's modern economic rise. In recent years, Vietnam has become one of Asia's biggest supply chains and a financial hub. Companies such as Samsung and Apple are investing in Vietnam, with Samsung committing $22 billion to establish factories and supply chains. America's policy of isolating China, also known as the China Plus One strategy, is another factor contributing to the corporate drift to Vietnam, with high-tech exports expected to reach $123 billion in 2024. The high-tech manufacturing sector is flourishing, especially in the electronics and smartphone industries. Vietnam is now the most popular destination for multinational corporations to export directly to Asia, due to its strategic proximity to the Asian consumer market. Vietnam's bamboo diplomacy shows how the country can be flexible in its dealings with China and the United States while remaining non-aligned. This progress is reflected in the stock market. Vietnam is currently considered a frontier market, but international index providers like FTSE and MSCI are expected to elevate it to emerging market status. This would boost investor confidence and draw in more foreign investment. Industries like technology, finance, and logistics are seeing increases in corporate profits. Businesses are moving to Vietnam in increasing numbers, and this trend is beginning to draw attention from all over the world. Overall, Vietnam's rapid rise is not just about numbers. It's a story of smart policy, a global shift in supply chains, youthful energy, and a steady focus on sustainable growth, making it one of Asia's most exciting economies today. Once regarded as a tool of the communist agenda, the Vietnamese is a rival to all major powers in the world today when it comes to being an economic miracle.